WrestleMania, especially him being world champion. And I knew at that time that there was no way in hell.
At 58, Kurt Angle looks back on his career with absolute clarity. He does not hide from the truth. There were wrestlers he respected, and there were wrestlers he hated. Hate for him was never about personal insults or backstage gossip. It came from men who challenged his standard, who clashed with his intensity, who tried to take control inside a ring where control mattered more than anything. Angle was an Olympic gold medalist, and he entered WWE, expecting the same discipline, the same precision, the same commitment to doing the job the right way. Not everyone shared that mindset. Some pushed him too far. Some refused to match his level. Some tried to overpower him or outshine him. That is where the real hate began. When a man disrupted the flow of a match, when ego replaced teamwork, when danger replaced professionalism that created a fire in Angle that never faded, those clashes shaped his career more than any championship. They defined the rivalries fans still talk about today. And now, at 58, Kurt Angle finally reveals the 5 wrestlers he hated the most. Number 5, Eddie Guerrero. Kurt Angle never denied the respect. Eddie was gifted smart, unpredictable, and able to change the energy of a match in 1 second. But respect is not the opposite of hate. In professional wrestling, they often live in the same room. Angle hated working with Eddie on certain nights because Eddie refused to stay inside the lines. Eddie wrestled with emotion first and structure second. While Angle came from a world where every movement had purpose, and every second belonged to the plan. That clash created nights that were unforgettable and nights that nearly broke them both. Their problems did not come from storyline. Their problems came from the moment Eddie decided he would not let Angle dictate the rhythm. Eddie was a master at forcing chaos, and Angle hated chaos. He wanted clean transitions, tight holds, controlled pacing. Eddie wanted to feel the crowd breathe, then swing the match in a direction no one expected, even if it meant pulling Angle into a place he did not want to go. One of their backstage arguments became famous because Eddie snapped after a match he thought went wrong, while Angle refused to accept that Eddie's improvisation was the reason. They had to be separated. Eddie accused Angle of being too rigid, too demanding, too cold. Angle fired back that Eddie was reckless, emotional, and impossible to trust when the pressure was high. Yet, when the bell rang, fans saw something different. Their matches were explosive because hate sharpened every exchange. Angle hated that Eddie could break free of his grip with a smirk on his face. Eddie hated that Angle tried to turn every match into a clinic. When Angle slammed Eddie and felt Eddie slip out sooner than expected, he felt it. When Eddie hit the ropes too early, forcing Angle to adjust, he felt it. When Eddie faked a stumble to steal control, he felt it. Hate in wrestling is not about destroying the other man. It is about the part of him that exposes your weakness. Eddie Guerrero exposed every part of Kurt Angle that he tried to keep perfect. And every time Eddie forced him into uncomfortable territory, Angle reacted with the same fire that won him Olympic gold. Years later, Angle would admit that Eddie brought the best out of him because Eddie brought the worst out of him too. That is why Eddie Guerrero stands at number 5. He was the man Kurt Angle respected, feared, and hated at the same time. That contradiction made their rivalry unforgettable and made Eddie a name Angle could never erase. Number 4, Brock Lesnar. Kurt Angle hated Brock for reasons that went far beyond television storylines. Brock was not just another big man. He was a natural weapon. Raw power with no ceiling. An athlete who could run faster than he should, weigh more than he should, and hit harder than anyone should. Angle came from the Olympic system, where strength was earned through discipline. Brock came from a world where strength was simply born into him. That difference created tension from their very first interaction. Angle looked at Brock and saw a challenge he refused to lose to. Brock looked at Angle and saw the one man who could test him on every level. Inside the ring, their chemistry was incredible, but behind that chemistry was a real competitive hate. Angle hated how Brock could explode through a takedown without perfect technique. Brock hated how Angle could break his balance with a small adjustment. Every training session became a fight for control. When they wrestled for real in the locker room, the room went silent because no one knew who would win. Angle hated that. He hated the idea that someone younger, bigger, and stronger could walk into his territory and claim it without asking. Brock hated being measured against an Olympic standard he felt did not apply to him. Their match at WrestleMania 19 proved everything fans suspected. Two men who could not stand the idea of losing to each other. Angle hated how Brock recovered from moves that should have slowed him. Brock hated how Angle kept rising after suplexes that folded his body. Even when Brock attempted the shooting star press and nearly shattered himself, the intensity did not disappear. Angle hated the danger Brock brought into the ring. Brock hated that even on a broken neck, Angle still outmaneuvered him. Their rivalry was built on mutual destruction. Neither wanted the other to survive the match. They wanted to dominate. They wanted to prove something bigger than storyline. Behind closed doors, Angle admitted Brock was the only man who made him feel physically outmatched. He hated that feeling. Brock said Angle was the only man who made him question his own explosiveness. He hated that too. What made their tension even deeper was respect. The real dangerous kind. The kind that grows between two men who know exactly how far the other can go. Angle hated Brock's unpredictability. Brock hated Angle's precision. Angle hated how Brock could break a lock by sheer force. Brock hated how Angle could counter anything by thinking faster. Two different worlds meeting in one ring. One built by structure, one built by power. And that is why Brock Lesnar stands at number 4. Not because Angle disliked him as a person, but because Brock represented the only kind of opponent Kurt Angle could never fully control. Hate came from the truth. Neither of them wanted to speak. They were too similar, too driven, too dangerous. And when two men like that collide, the ring becomes a battlefield, and the rivalry becomes something that never fades. Brock Lesnar pushed Kurt Angle to his limits and made him confront the idea that brute force could equal mastery. Angle hated that reality, and that hate made every second between them unforgettable. Number 3. Triple H. Kurt Angle hated Triple H for reasons that had nothing to do with moves or sequences inside the ring. This was about position, power, timing, and the reality of how WWE worked in the early 2000s. Triple H was already established as a top figure, a main event presence tied directly to the heartbeat of the company. Angle arrived with Olympic gold natural charisma, unmatched intensity, and a rapid rise that surprised the entire locker room. That combination created immediate friction. Angle hated how every major opportunity seemed to require going through Triple H. Triple H hated how quickly Angle earned credibility and spotlight without years of political survival. Their chemistry in the ring was strong, but their tension backstage was stronger. Angle worked like a machine. Triple H worked like a general. Angle approached matches with pure athletic focus. Triple H approached them with a long-term view of power control and story direction. Those worlds collided hard during the storyline involving Stephanie McMahon. The story was scripted, but the tension was not. Angle hated the way Triple H treated that angle as territory that belonged only to him. Triple H hated how Angle's comedic timing and real charm made the crowd react in ways he could not fully control. That dynamic created a rivalry where every gesture meant something. When Angle grabbed Stephanie's hand, the locker room buzzed. When Triple H stared him down, the room felt the temperature change. They both knew that TV blurred into reality more than anyone admitted. Angle hated that Triple H had influence inside the company during a time when booking decisions were shaped by relationships as much as performance. Triple H hated that Angle could steal reactions from the crowd with a simple smirk or a perfectly timed suplex. They had one match after another where the energy backstage followed them into the ring. Angle hated how Triple H forced a slower pace that favored power and methodical control. Triple H hated how Angle would suddenly shift a match with pure athletic explosiveness that made Triple H look like he was chasing him. Their matches showed a rivalry that looked professional on the surface, but underneath was a quiet war about status and legitimacy. Triple H viewed himself as the anchor of his era. Angle viewed himself as the most complete wrestler on the planet. When two men believe their way is the right way, conflict becomes inevitable. One moment defined their hidden hatred more than any other. During a backstage discussion over match structure, Angle pushed for a sequence that Triple H rejected, Angle insisted it made the match better. Triple H insisted it did not fit his vision. Neither man backed down. That argument never made it to television, but everyone in the room understood that these were two leaders fighting over control. Angle later admitted he hated how Triple H always seemed to stand between him and long-term main event stability. Triple H admitted in interviews that Angle's rise was faster than anyone expected and made things complicated. They respected each other, but respect did not erase the silent battles over direction matches and spotlight. That is why Triple H stands at number 3. He was not the man Angle hated for danger or unpredictability. He was the man Angle hated because Triple H represented a mountain that could not be thrown suplex to the mat. He represented a power structure that no amount of athletic skill could fully overcome. And that made their rivalry one of the deepest and most complicated of Angle's career. Number 2, Samoa Joe. Kurt Angle hated Samoa Joe for reasons that were brutally simple. Joe brought a level of physical danger that felt real every time they stepped into the ring. Angle expected intensity. Joe delivered something closer to collision. Their rivalry in TNA became legendary not because of storylines, but because every punch, every hold, every slam carried the weight of two men refusing to give an inch. Angle came into TNA with the pride of an Olympic champion and the legacy of a WWE main eventer. Joe looked at him and saw a target. Someone to break, someone to test, someone to expose. Angle hated that. He hated that Joe did not care about reputation. Joe cared about violence executed with precision and purpose. He hit harder than most. He moved faster than a man his size should. He pressured Angle with a style that mixed submission, striking, and raw aggression. Angle hated how Joe forced him backward and made him fight from defensive positions he rarely faced in WWE. Their first match told the world exactly what this rivalry was built on. Not respect. Not professional rivalry. Pure, competitive hate. Joe came at Angle with a pace that shocked him. Angle countered with suplexes that shocked Joe. At one point, Joe delivered a kick that nearly knocked Angle out. Angle responded with a takedown so sharp the audience gasped. They were not trying to entertain. They were trying to break through each other's armor. Backstage, the tension was just as real. Joe pushed for a style that blurred the line between performance and fight. Angle hated it, but refused to step back. He would not let a younger star dictate the tone. Joe hated Angle's mindset that everything should follow structure and control. Joe believed great matches were built on instinct. Angle believed they were built on discipline. Those opposing philosophies created a kind of hate that burned without theatrics. One night, Angle confronted Joe after a match, telling him he had gone too far. Joe fired back that Angle needed to toughen up if he wanted to stand in the ring with him. That argument did not end with reconciliation. It ended with silence and understanding that their war was far from over. Their Iron Man match showed the world the truth. Joe pushed Angle to the edge of exhaustion. Angle pushed Joe into desperation. Joe's strikes left marks on Angle's chest that lasted for days. Angle's holds left Joe limping for a week. Angle hated how Joe could absorb punishment and keep advancing. Joe hated how Angle refused to break, no matter what he threw at him. Fans saw two warriors. They did not see the reality. Two men who hated the idea of losing to each other. Angle hated that Joe represented the new era. Joe hated that Angle represented the old guard. Their rivalry was a test of identity as much as ability. And that is why Samoa Joe stands at number 2. He was not just a rival. He was the man who forced Kurt Angle into the deepest physical and psychological battles of his entire career. Number 1, Shawn Michaels. Kurt Angle hated Shawn in a way that only two elite performers can hate each other. This was not about danger or politics. This was about identity. Angle entered WWE as a pure athlete, a machine built on precision timing and absolute technical command. Shawn Michaels was the complete opposite. He was instinct, emotion, rhythm, and improvisation. Angle hated that unpredictability. He hated that Shawn could walk into a match, change the pace without warning, and force Angle to adjust instantly. Their collision at WrestleMania 21 exposed everything that made their tension real. Angle wanted structure. Shawn wanted freedom. Angle wanted clean transitions and a match that unfolded like a blueprint. Shawn wanted moments born out of impulse. The result was chemistry that felt explosive because underneath every exchange was a real struggle for control. Shawn tried to slow the match, let the crowd breathe, then explode with timing only he understood. Angle hated that. He wanted the match to follow his tempo, a tempo built on Olympic discipline. When Shawn switched direction mid-sequence, Angle felt the pressure spike. He hated how Shawn could steal momentum with a single expression or a sudden shift of footwork. Shawn hated how Angle could drag him into deep technical waters, where instinct alone was not enough. Their backstage interactions matched their ring energy. Angle confronted Shawn more than once about pacing and timing. Shawn pushed back, telling Angle that wrestling was about art, not math. Angle fired back that art falls apart without structure. This was not a loud rivalry. It was quiet, sharp, full of moments where both men understood they were dealing with someone who threatened their identity. Angle hated that Shawn had a level of crowd connection he could not replicate with pure skill. Shawn hated that Angle could out-wrestle him even on his best night. Their Iron Man match negotiations were intense. Angle insisted on sequences that showcased technical dominance. Shawn insisted on emotional peaks that did not always match the structure Angle wanted. Both refused to give ground. When they stepped into the ring, their hate made every moment sharper. Angle slammed Shawn with suplexes that carried the weight of frustration. Shawn hit Angle with strikes that carried the weight of defiance. When Shawn locked in the sharpshooter, Angle felt his pride ignite. When Angle caught Shawn in the ankle lock, Shawn felt something he rarely felt: vulnerability. That finishing sequence revealed the truth. Hate fueled excellence. Hate created the match fans still call one of the greatest of all time. After the bout, both men admitted they pushed each other harder than expected. But Angle never forgot the chaos Shawn brought into his world. And Shawn never forgot how Angle tried to bend him into discipline he refused to obey. That is why Shawn Michaels stands at number 1. Not because he was the most dangerous or the most political, but because he was the one man Kurt Angle could not fully control. Hate lived in every second they shared the ring, and that hate elevated them both to something unforgettable. Kurt Angle's story is not defined by medals or titles. It is defined by the men who forced him into battles he could not escape. Eddie Guerrero pushed his patience and turned precision into chaos. Brock Lesnar forced him to confront raw power that matched his intensity. Triple H challenged his rise with politics influence and the unspoken war over spotlight. Samoa Joe dragged him into fights that blurred the line between performance and survival. And Shawn Michaels shattered every rule Angle lived by and made him wrestle in a place where discipline and instinct collided. These 5 men shaped the version of Kurt Angle fans remember today. Hate was never personal. And if you won Maze, crew boss of Mend of Live. And if you doddles, crew boss of Mend of Live Connax. Hate was never personal. Hate was the fire that sharpened every part of him. Hate created matches that still echo long after the bell. At 58, Angle looks back without regret because every rivalry revealed a truth he needed to face. And now the question turns to you. If you lived through the golden years of wrestling, which 5 names would define your list?